is speaking right now because there is a resistor who just came out in the New York Times and is anonymous and it says they're trying to control him. Go.
Point after point after point. If you look, almost 4 million jobs created since the election, of which many are young. Americans now employed than ever recorded in our history. So we have more people working today than at any point ever in our history. We've created 400,000 manufacturing jobs. Manufacturing jobs are growing at the fastest pace in more than 30 years. Economic growth last quarter was 4.2%. And as you people know, it was headed down big, and it was a low number, very low number. It would have been, in my opinion, it would have been less than zero. It was heading to negative numbers. New employment claims recently hit think of that, the unemployment picture in the country is the best it's been in 49 years. African-American unemployment lowest in the history of our country. Asian American unemployment lowest in the history of our country. Hispanic American unemployment lowest in the history of our country. I mean, I'm just looking at these, just point after point. Under my administration, veterans unemployment reached its lowest in many, many years. Let's see, almost 3.9 million Americans have been lifted off food stamps just since my election. Then you go into all of the benefits that we got from the tax cuts. All of you people benefited tremendously from the tax cuts. You go into regulation cuts. You go into right to try. Right to try is where you have the right, if a person's terminally ill, you have a right to go and try and see whether or not a drug that's not approved yet can be used and utilized. They didn't allow that. Point after point, getting rid of the individual mandate, the most unpopular thing there is in Obamacare, coming up with new health care plans. We've never had a period, even if you look at the Olympics, the World Cup, you just saw them, they were in my office, got the World Cup. Nobody has, and we have started the wall. Nobody has ever done in less than a 2-year period what we've done. So when you tell me about some anonymous source within the administration, probably who's failing and probably here for all the wrong reasons, no. And the New York Times is failing. If I weren't here, I believe the New York Times probably wouldn't even exist. And someday, when I'm not president, which hopefully will be in about 6.5 years from now, the New York Times and CNN and all of these phony media outlets will be out of business, folks. They'll be out of business because there'll be nothing to write and there'll be nothing of interest. So nobody has done what this administration has done. And I agree, it's different from an agenda, which is much different than ours, and it's certainly not your agenda, that I can tell you.
Thank you.
It's about open borders. It's about letting people flee into our country. It's about a disaster and crime for our country. So they don't like Donald Trump, and I don't like them because they're very dishonest people. Remember this also about the New York Times. When I won, they were forced to apologize to their subscribers. They wrote a letter of apology. It was the first time anybody's ever done it because they covered the election incorrectly. So if the failing New York Times has an anonymous editorial, can you believe it? Anonymous, meaning gutless, a gutless editorial. We're doing a great job. The poll numbers are through the roof. Our poll numbers are great. And guess what? Nobody is going to come close to beating me in 2020 because of what we've done. We've done more than anybody ever thought possible in, it's not even 2 years. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right, that was the president at a law enforcement event, kind of going off script a little bit because of this major bombshell in the New York Times. This is an op-ed published anonymously. It says, I am part of the resistance inside the Trump administration. I work for the president. but like-minded colleagues and I have vowed to thwart parts of his agenda and his worst inclinations. So this isn't a Democrat, Greg, who's come out and says, you know, I'm a Bernie bro and I'm mole. This is I guess a Republican who wants the administration to succeed. They want a strong military. They want tax cuts. They want deregulation. But because of the president's character, because of the president's style and ideology and the way he kind of changes things, and they say his immorality, they are not carrying out directives, and he says many of them, many officials and appointees believe this same way, and they're protecting the country from Trump like he's a child.
All right, there's 2 points to make here, one that's very specific and one that's general. In this editorial, we want the administration to succeed, they say, because he's already made America and safer and more prosperous. What more do you want than that? Because you don't like his personality? We have already made America safer and more prosperous.
Yeah.
What else do you want? You just proved his deep state, you moron. All right, so here's what the greater thing. I've been a boss. I understand how people talk about bosses. Your bosses are never normal. They're mercurial, they're demanding, they're often infantile. Because
Except our boss, so I believe is one of the greatest bosses in American history.
Here's the point, and I would extend this to Woodward's book as well. Let's say you had cabbage for lunch, Jesse, and I said, you're going to regret that. Woodward would write, Gregg Gutfeild just threatened Jesse Waters. The fact is, if you follow somebody around on their behavior, and let's say, this is Bob Woodward describing my day. He just insulted Dana Perino's dog, an animal that she loves dearly. And then he made a joke about her height, which I imagine she would be sensitive to because she didn't respond. She seemed shocked by it. Then he yelled at the producers about a segment. Then he demanded a cough drop from the floor director. And then he started talking to himself and singing about food. I have described my afternoon. But the thing is, because somebody like Woodward in the New York Times takes these things literal, and not in context about how a person is, how a boss is. They are completely clueless. Each one of us could have this treatment done by somebody who takes stark, literal interpretations of behavior that is out of context. Woodward is a stenographer. He is not a great journalist.
But
Let's be clear.
Well, let me just say, I think he is a great journalist. And I think that
he doesn't get people. Juan, he doesn't get people. If I insulted you, he would write as though I did something horrible to you instead of if it was a joke.
Well, that would be wrong. In that case, he'd be wrong because he lacked context.
Yes.
But I don't think that's generally the case with Woodward. I think he's a pretty good reporter. I think he's a very good reporter. But second thing to say is the piece that was written anonymously in the Times is written by somebody who works for Trump. And
who
Trump,
also leaks to the Times.
I don't mind, but I'm just saying it's written by a Trump person.
A senior official who they know well, a person leaking to the New York Times.
Okay, but my point to you, Greg, is that if you look at Unhinged, right, which is the Omarosa book, you look at the Michael Wolff book, Fear and Fury, right, this seems to be, from someone with more credibility, the same story. The same kind of behavior. Here, this guy saying, this is the anonymous guy saying, we're doing what we can to preserve our democratic institution while thwarting Mr. Trump's misguided impulses. And talks about this is not deep state. He says it's steady state.
I know, that's
right. Well, he's taken it upon himself to say, as an unelected person, that the will of the American people doesn't matter. Because even though they elected President Trump to be the commander-in-chief, to be the chief executive, and to do the things that he campaigned on and follow through on his promises, I have elevated myself above that, above the commander-in-chief and above the American people in this democracy, and I'm the adult in the room, and I'm going to do what I think is necessary for the country instead of what the commander-in-chief believes is necessary from the country. This is what that op-ed says.
Let me ask you a question.
And Juan, I don't know what's going on in this administration, but that's kind of scary.
Well, not to me, but let me ask you a question.
Well, not to you because it helps you.
No, it does not. You think that, look, I'm an American. I want the best for the country. Trump is my president.
Well, I believe that
but I got to ask you a question.
For the country too.
When Trump behaves in this way, you don't have any fear.
Look, I think, and listen, I'm not going to speak for the president, but the president is obviously unorthodox. He shoots from the hip, And I believe a lot of people in that
when he lies to
administration
you-
I think the bigger
are not
question-
used to that person as the president.
He's the boss.
I'm going to
Everybody's
defer
had one.
to Dana on this because she worked in White House, but I think the larger question is whether people working for an administration and leaking out pieces of information and publishing anonymous op-eds is really good for the country. And there are
how's the
serious
president
questions.
gonna react to this thing here?
Well, and there are serious questions about the New York Times publishing this because the Society of Professional Journalists has a very long code. They say avoid lurid curiosity. There's all kinds of things you're supposed to avoid. Their explanation for publishing an anonymous op-ed is pretty thin when it comes to the justification for this. It used to be that you use anonymous sources very sparingly because you had to make sure that the information was reliable and that people understood where it was coming from to have the broader context. They're treating everybody who happens to be against Trump like a whistleblower, and it's damaging to people who actually want to come forward and have those protections to root out real corruption in the government, because this op-ed wasn't published to expose some kind of new revelation about Trump's behavior. It was published because the New York Times agrees with it.
But you don't